like I said, welcome. We are going to be doing a presentation on the Grants Financial Management Division. We're going to be focusing on a wide range of things. Again, my name is Michael Sterling, and I'm also here with my colleague, Suhaila Lasky. She will be looking on in the chat box. So if you have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to hold it. Don't hesitate to wait to ask the questions. Please put them in. We also have a Q&A box as well. So any questions, just put them in there. And what we'll do is we will set time apart throughout the presentation to answer those questions. So we just want to make sure we get to all the questions, and instead of just waiting to the end of the presentation, we're able to do it as we go along through the process. So let me move on with the presentation. So again, GFMD, I'm Michael. I'm also here with Suhaila. So GFMD, our Grants Financial Management Division, what we do is we do a wide range of services for our grantees. From the start of the grant to the point of like submitting applications and the review of the applications, all the way to the closeout and beyond, we do work with our grantees in multiple ranges. Excuse me. So when at the application process, when reviewing applications, you may have gotten emails from one of our financial analysts asking regarding the pre-award risk assessment, you know, those 10 questions that you had to answer part of the application. You know, we review those things. In addition, you know, we review if you submitted single audit, we will have to review if they had any findings. We have to check with any other questions. We check your DUNS to make sure that it's active. So we do a wide range of things in the pre-application, pre-award process. In addition to that, we review and approve budgets. So, you know, at the start of the grant, when you all get the grant, we most times get to some of the grants prior to it being approved, but sometimes we will have to review the budgets after everyone gets their grant. So we do reach out, work with the grantees to getting the budgets approved and everything. We do TA and training, so what we're doing today. In addition to that, we work with the grant adjustments. We review the grant adjustments and we do approvals. GFMD, we work on the budget modifications as well as the no-cost extensions. In addition to that, we do conference calls requests. I think with these grants, we don't work with those as much with these grants, but that's one of the things that we do. In addition, we develop financial grants administration policies. So the DOJ financial guide, we do play a part in creating that. That's one of the main things that we give for the grantees to make sure they're following everything for the grants. We also work with OIG audit resolution. So just if there's any OIG audits that come to an OVW grantee, and if the OVW grant is related to the resolution of the audit, we'll be working with our audit resolution team to get those things resolved. And then, like I said, we also work on the closeout of the grants. And also, I would like to say, I know you all, you know, because of the new grant year, we are going into the new system, the Just Grants as well as ASAP. I would say please hold those questions or send those questions to our help desk. We can sit here this entire presentation going through both of those systems, and it would just take so much time out of the presentation. So what I would say, if you have any questions related to Just Grants or ASAP, please send them over to our help desk or the Just Grants help desk and ASAP help desk. They will answer those questions, and here in the presentation we do have their contact information for our help desk, the Just Grants help desk, as well as the ASAP help desk. When it comes with the ASAP help desk, they will be the ones to assist if you need any password resets, or you need, you know, usernames to be resent, or any emails and stuff of that nature to be resent. But if you have any general questions for ASAP and you can't get a hold of them, you can also contact our help desk, and we will do our best to help you. Our help desk is worked by all of our financial analysts. So when you contact us, whether it's via email or you call and leave a voicemail, we will get back to you within 1 day. We rotate days on the help desk, so every day there is someone working the emails as well as checking the voicemails on the phone. Our help desk is in the office and we are working remotely. So if you do call our help desk, you probably won't get a live person on the call. But if you leave a voicemail, like I said, we will get back to you. We'll give you a call back. Or if you send us an email and say, hey, I would like to schedule some time to talk about, this or that, whatever you may want to, just let us know. We'll set a time and we'll give you a call. Like I said, feel free to contact us with any questions. We love talking with our grantees. We love, helping them out, making sure everything is running smoothly with their grants. So don't feel hesitant to give us a call. Okay, so we're going to go right into the presentation. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the administrative requirements. Basically, the administrative requirements is what we need to follow, the federal regulations. So the three things that we follow, and we tell our grantees that they will have to follow, as well as ourselves, is the Uniform Administrative Requirements, also known as the 2 CFR Part 200. That came into effect back in 2015. At this point, all the grants should be following this regulations. If you have any awards prior to 2015, you will follow the old regulations, but we're already at 2020, so majority or if not all grants at this point is following the new Uniform Administrative Requirements. In addition, we follow our DOJ Financial Guide, which is available on our website, as well as we do provide links to it at the end of this presentation. So you can always check that out. We usually update that regularly, but that also has this information from the administrative requirements, as well as any requirements or guidance for OVW, as well as any other DOJ grants. And the third thing you want to follow is your program solicitation. You want to make sure that you are looking and making sure you read through your solicitations for any requirements, because each program is different. So each program has its own requirements, like the travel requirements or victim services requirements, different types of requirements that you may need to put either in your budget or in your program narrative or stuff of that nature, or you have to allocate X amount of funds for these type of activities. So you want to make sure that you are reading, your program solicitation thoroughly. And it's always good to have a copy of it, even after you got the award. Just have a copy saved, as well as these other two regulations, because it's always good to go back and just double check it. If there's anything that you may have a question about, it's good to go back and check through the solicitation, through the financial guide, as well as the administrative requirements. Like I said, all of these are available. We have links to them at the end of the presentation. So if you downloaded this presentation, you will have the links for them as well. I would recommend, same thing, have electronic, because these could be very lengthy documents. So always good to have them bookmarked on your browser. So when you have a grant and you have these funds, you have costs, there's standards for the cost. You have the federal funds, you have to ensure that you have to follow certain requirements. So the costs have to be allowable, they have to be reasonable, they have to be necessary, they have to be allocable, they have to be related to the program. You cannot just get any, once you get the funds, the cost related to the funds has to be related to the funds, has to be related to the program itself. So that's why it's very important to read and go through your solicitation to know exactly what are the activities you're going to be doing. In addition, you only could claim for this grant, you can only keep paying for one award. So you cannot utilize, these funds to cover costs or anything of that nature for another award. You get these funds to complete activities for this particular award. So you want to make sure that you have proper policies and procedures in place to ensure that you are spending these funds for this award. So you have to follow state and federal laws and regulations. The federal regulations, the administrative requirements, But if your states as well have certain requirements on how you utilize funds, you also want to make sure that you follow those regulations as well. In regards to how your costs are being treated, it has to be treated consistent throughout your entire organization. So you have to make sure that when you are, setting up these costs and everything, that you're following it and you're treating them consistently, whether they're federal or non-federal. So, how the organization is ran, it should be ran as a whole. You have to ensure that you are consolidating them from both federal and non-federal. And then also, like I said before, you cannot utilize one grant funds to cover another grant's either funds deficiencies, or let's say another grant of yours may have a restriction or has a hold or something of that nature, and you say, well, we have another grant, let's utilize this grant to cover those, those costs because of its hold. You cannot do that, so you want to make sure that you have a proper accounting system and proper policies in place to ensure that you are spending the proper funds for the proper award and it's being recorded properly, because as we're going to talk about later on in the presentation, a lot of times that is some of the findings that come up. So you want to make sure that you're tracking your funds properly, as well as you're charging them to the proper award. So, like I said, if things may come up, things that will come up is the OIG audit. Single audit is required if you are spending more. If you spent more than $750,000 of federal grant funds. So if you hit that threshold, you're required to do a single audit. And then also we do financial monitoring. So our office does our own financial monitoring. So it's important to make sure that you have like those proper policies, proper steps in place, because more than likely your organization is going to be reviewed to make sure everything is running smoothly. Now, these things are very important. Of course, like the single audit is very important because it needs to be done if you meet that threshold. Financial monitoring is important because we will have to just check on the grantees just to make sure everything is running smoothly. But then also OIG audits are very, very important because those can put a real, I would say like, those can be a big problem if there's issues come to play from it. So it's always important, very important, that you are following the regulations, and as well as you're doing everything in the correct manner, so that if you do have an OIG audit, or when you do your single audit or have a financial monitoring visit, everything is ran smoothly. So some of the things that are being reviewed in these audits or monitoring visits is how the organization is doing as a whole, like how are they operating, whether or not they have written policies and procedures, their accounting policies as well as their organizational policies and procedures. They check what the approved budget is to what they actually charge to the grant, or what are their actual costs. And then also they see if there's any cash on hand. So you want to make sure these things are being, one, you have them in place, and two, you're able to have documentation to represent these things. Most common findings from these audits and monitoring visits, the first one is documentation. So one of the biggest things you'll probably hear throughout this presentation is document, document, document. It is very important, documentation of their grant. Like I said, this is probably one of the biggest findings in these audits or financial monitoring visits. So you want to make sure that you have, invoices, that you have copies of contracts, receipts, all of that nature, all of that stuff. You have copies of it, or you have original ones showing what the expenses are for the grant. Another big finding is inadequate or no timesheets. So you want to make sure that's a very, very important thing. You have to be able to show the time and activities of the individuals working on the grant to ensure that the time that they worked on this grant is charged properly. So that's probably the second biggest findings that we see. Other findings are expenditures that's reported in the financial status report. The federal financial report does not match what is indicated in the general ledger. So like I said, what you're reporting on those reports should be what you actually spent for those particular periods. It should not be what you budgeted or just what you drew down. You want to make sure that your federal financial report is matching your general ledgers. Another one is no policies and procedures. Either your policy, you don't have written policies and procedures, or they're inadequate, they're vague, or they're just not as detailed enough. It's very, very important. This is also some of the findings that I see is policies and procedures are not clear, they're inconsistent, or they're not even being followed properly. So just having those policies and procedures is one part of it. The other part is making sure that it's being followed properly to ensure that the individuals within the organizations are following their policies and procedures and everything is being done properly with those procedures. And other findings are moving funds beyond, without getting prior approval, if it's beyond the 10% threshold for a budget modification, not getting that proper approval before making those changes. And another one is charging the incorrect indirect cost rate agreement in the wrong period. So you also want to make sure that you are looking at your indirect cost rate agreement and seeing what are those effective dates and ensuring that you're charging it properly to your grant. So with these findings, you know, again, this is not just to scare everyone. This is not just to be like, hey, if you don't do this, you know, it's a big, big issue. But we have to let the grantees know that, hey, these things will come up, i.e. the audits and the financial monitoring visits. And if there are issues or if there are findings, we do work with the grantees to resolve those findings. So, you know, that's where the audit resolution team comes into place, where they say, okay, hey, you know, this grantee has these findings, has the organization resolved it, or has the organization, you know, done the proper steps to correct this issue? So we work with the grantees to resolve the findings to ensure that it does not, you know, resolve the original issue, and also to ensure that it does not happen again, because you just don't want those constant audits or those constant findings holding you back from completing your objectives. But from some of the findings, what could happen is if there's any unallowable costs, they will have to be returned, because if it's an unallowable cost, it's just unallowable, so it has to be returned to either our office or whatever office that they grant it for. You may be placed on the DOJ high risk list. That will come, with that may come funds may be placed on hold. Organizations may be placed on a reimbursement status, which means basically you have to follow up with us, our office, to gain your funds. Instead of just going in and drawing down funds, you would need to submit like your general ledgers for the quarters. We will have to review it, and then we will have to go about approving the release of funds. Bigger findings, and this is where it gets to a point that things may not be resolved or it's a constant issue, is possible termination of the award, negative future funding decisions, so it may affect how your future applications may be looked at, and if there's any criminal activities, it will lead to an OIG investigation. And again, that is only if there's criminal activities related to those findings. But like I said, it's important to know these things because, like I said, single audits, if you meet that threshold, you have to do it. Financial monitoring visits, that may occur, so you want to be ready for that. And again, same thing, OIG audits may come into play as well. They may come in and say, hey, we're coming in, we're going to do an audit. So you want to be ready for those things. Okay, so we're going to stop here and we're going to see the Q&A if there's any questions. I will pass it on to Suhaila. Suhaila, if there's any questions that may have come up that we should highlight. And I do see if she's been answering. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so we had a question from Gail, and she was asking if so we have a grant that started October 1st but have not received an approved budget. Is there an expected timeline for this? And my response was that, thanks for checking on the status. We are diligently working on budgets along with the other activities related to the systems transitions, and that sorry, I'm trying to, the chat box isn't moving, that we will ensure that we don't have a projected timeline right now just because there's a lot of things going on. But we advise that all grantees ensure that they set up the users ingest grants so that if there are any questions that we have, that we can easily contact the right people, the point of contacts that are set up for their organization. And then there was a second question from Leslie, similar question about the timeline for the budgets, and that there are products due within 90 days of October 1st that require our partners' participation. So requesting for additional clarification on the timeline. And I believe within the next few weeks that you should hear from GFMD. So just keep an eye out, make sure that you have the right people that are assigned to the correct points of contact in the system so that we can send an email if there's any additional questions that we have. And also just to be responsive is all we ask, so that if there are questions that we can get a response, and if there's any follow-up that we can easily have quick communication back and forth. That's always very helpful. Thank you. And Gail had a question. Will we Gail asked, will you cover how to handle subgrants? And the answer is yes, we have a whole section on subgrants. But Gail, if what we go over at that time doesn't cover your exact question, just let us know and we will answer your question at that point as well. Thank you. And that's it, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Suhaila. Yep. So if there isn't any other questions, we will move on. So next, what we're going to talk about is setting up your award. Setting up your award. So with here, you want to make sure that you are having everything set up properly, everything in order once you get your award. So some of the things that you want to make sure that you have and want to make sure that you have in place is, one, you want to create a grant file. This grant file can either be electronic, it can be a hard copy, however the organization feels it's easier for them. But you want to make sure that you have that. And the grant file basically is any documentation related to the grant. The solicitation, the award package that you receive once you receive your grant, copies of the financial status reports, and a copy of the programmatic reports. Just anything, any correspondence, like email correspondence or anything of that nature, you want to have it saved elsewhere. That is your grant file. That is, if anybody comes in, let's say, you hire a new person, they want to get caught up with the grant, you can say, hey, here you go, check the grant file, you can see everything that's happened. This is important to have because of that. If there is change in the organization, if you are transitioning, new people in there, you want to be able to have some type of documentation or some type of trail that you can say, hey, look, read through this and you can see and get caught up with how the organization is ran. In addition, it's important, like I said, documentation is important. That grant file is a great source of that documentation. If you say, hey, let's say it's 2021, let's say it's March 2021, and you had a conversation with me, the financial analyst, over the budget back in December, and you're like, well, I remember Michael saying this in Viva email, I just can't remember exactly off the top of my head. You'd be like, oh, wait, I have a copy of that email saved. That's what we had that conversation about, and you can pull it up. So it's always important to have a grant file saved. That way you can just easily go back and find that information that you're looking for, because Listen, I know I get a lot of emails, and a lot of times I have to go back, and I'm like, I can't, I get questions for something that we spoke about a week ago, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I always try to save at least something or write down something of majority of my conversations with my grantee, so that way I know if they follow back up, I can say, okay, I remember that conversation, let me pull it back up, and then that way I have it. In addition to that, you want to make sure you're reviewing your special conditions. Your special conditions are in that award package. Please make sure that you are reading those special conditions thoroughly, making sure you understand each of them. If you have any questions for those special conditions, follow up with your program manager or contact us. So it's very important that you review those special conditions, because a lot of times those may be the reason why the fund's on hold, because it may be that the budget hasn't been approved, so there's a special condition there. Or you may have another one in place that has certain requirements. So you want to make sure that the special conditions are reviewed. You want to set up a cost center for your accounting system. So if you have multiple awards, if you have multiple grants within your organization, whether it is OVW or DOJ related, or even outside of those, you want to make sure you have a good accounting system in place where you can track those expenses, where you can say, okay, we got X amount of funds for this OVW grant, and these are the expenses related to it. Your accounting system should be able to reflect that, should be able to show that, okay, X expenses were for this grant, X expenses were for this other grant. So it's very important that you have a cost center or some type of system in place in your accounting system, whether you do it, like I said, there's programs, there's platforms that do all that, or you can do it old school, more of an old schooler way through Excel, entering all the information. So you just want to make sure you have something in place that you are able to track that. In addition to tracking like the expenses from one grant to another, it's important to track what is budgeted versus what is actual. Because like I said, the financial status reports, what you're reporting on there is what you actually spent. So what is indicated in your general ledgers. But you also want to make sure that you are checking what you're actually spending to what you budgeted. Because there may be instances that you may spend more on a particular category than another category. And we're going to go a bit more in that later in the presentation. But it's always important to make sure that you're tracking what you budgeted to what you actually spent on these awards. And like I said, document. You're required to keep that source documentation. That's where the grant file comes into place. So, excuse me, you want to make sure that you are keeping records of your documentation. So like I said, when you're creating a grant file, these are some of the things that should be in there. You can add more stuff into it, but like I said, a copy of your application, signed award documents, any MOU partnerships, signed MOU partnerships, or any budgets related to that. Your approved budget, you want to have a copy of that. If you make any changes to that budget, you might want to keep track of that as well. Or if you submit a budget modification, make sure that you save that new approved budget, so that way you're able to know this is the current budget that we're using. Like I said, in correspondence, those correspondence could be emails, basically written. If you had a phone call, probably just jotting down when you had that phone call and kind of what was spoken about during that call. And any financial records, the financial status reports, and a good thing is include the general ledgers related to that report during that particular period. So that way you can easily pull that up and say, okay, this is a report, this is the general ledger related to it. They're connected right there, and it's all available right at the grant file. Okay. So this is an example of the special condition. Excuse me. So this is the special condition in regards to the hold due to the budget hasn't been approved. Of course, this says, the organization can only spend up to $10,000 due to the hold on the budget, and they only can spend $10,000 for travel purposes. we all know because of what everything is that's happening now, traveling is basically placed on hold. So you do want to follow up with your program manager if they, because I know they are making changes in regards to the required travel funds, but if you have any questions related to the travel costs or updating the required travel amount, follow up with your program manager, and they usually let us know as well during the process of us reviewing the budgets to make sure that, that amount is correct. So next, when you're tracking budgeted versus actual. So like I said, it's very important that you are making sure that you're looking at what you have budgeted to what you're actually spending throughout the grant. Excuse me 1 second, let me take a drink. Excuse me. So with that, that's why it's very important to have a good financial system in place and a good system to review what is being budgeted and what is being actually spent. So you can keep a tracker on it as the grant goes along so that if you need to make a budget modification, you can submit that. Or if you need to follow up with the program manager and say, hey, we spent X amount on, let's say you were able to travel. We spent so much on travel, and we still have much more travel that needs to be done. We need to reallocate some funds from another category. You're able to see that information if you're tracking it, so then you can say, okay, what are the categories that we can move funds from? Or if we can't, what can we do to offset those upcoming expenses? So like I said, if you have any questions with this, you can follow up with us. But another big thing is you want to make sure within your organization that your financial staff is working real close with the program staff. Because a lot of times that's how you can understand how the expenses are coming in and like why these particular expenses, why maybe one category is going high so much compared to another category. The financial staff may just be looking at it from the numbers standpoint. It's like, okay, we budgeted X amount, so we should be spending at or around that amount. But the program side may say, hey, there's a reason why we have to spend more, let's say, on training, because we need to get our staff updated on these new training abilities to help our clients, to help our victims. So it's always important that both sides, both the program side and the financial side, work together. In OVW, our program managers work very closely with GFMD. Back when we were in the office, we were literally sitting like a cube next to each other. So if we ever had a question, if I had a question, I can just, peek my head over and say, hey, I got a question about this program. How can I, what can I do to remedy this? Or if the program side had a question for me, it's like an easy just come over and say, hey, I have a question, financially, is this allowable? And then we can have that discussion. And a lot of times it is very, very important. It makes both sides' job a lot easier when you're reviewing budgets, when you're reviewing expenses and stuff of that nature. It makes it so much easier when both sides work together and closely. So here is an example of tracking budgeted versus actual. So like I said, you're keeping track of it. You're kind of seeing what you actually budgeted, and then you're seeing what you're spending throughout the grant. And it's a good way to track that, because to see, okay, we're on track. Our personnel, all right, throughout the first quarter of the grant, we are spending, we're on track to kind of what we should be spending. Training just related to personnel, so that should be about the same. But then here for this example, you can see you budgeted $23,000 for travel, and then, but however, you still have an excess amount of travel left over. So you may say, well, we haven't really traveled. Like, why haven't we spent as much in travel? And it might be because of this. Well, we can't travel. So our travel expenses, we're going to have an excess amount of travel. So that may be something that may bring up well, I wouldn't say a flag, or it may bring up something where you say, hey, okay, can we move those funds or can we utilize those funds to another category that's beneficial to the program? Then if you see further down under contracts and consultants, let's say it's here budgeted for $83,000 and you're already a quarter into the grant and it's almost majority has been spent. So then that may be the question of, okay, why have we spent majority of our contracts and consultants? That's where you may have that conversation of like, okay, are we paying them too fast? Are they getting the funds faster than what they were supposed to? Was there an error in the accounting records? Do we have to review their contract to see like how is this being spent? Just to make sure that all of that information is being followed properly. So it's always important to have something of this nature in your programs or in your organization, because you want to make sure that you're seeing what you budgeted and what you spent. Because if any changes occur or something looks out of place, you can address it quicker than waiting to the end of the grant and then coming to find out there was an error or something that needed prior approval that didn't get prior approval, and that's going to make a bigger issue come later on. So it's always important to have something like this. Check it periodically. Like I said, program side and the financial team work hand in hand on this. The financial team may just follow up with the program side and say, hey, we've been spending a bit more with our consultants. Why is that? What have they been doing that we had to pay them more than what we normally budgeted? Or, for example, travel, like, hey, I see staff is traveling a lot more than normal. Why is that? Like, what are we doing that's resulting us to travel a bit more? So that way everybody's on the same page, and if things need to get approved, they can get approved. So with source documentation, those type of documentations are like timesheets, any type of purchase orders if you're buying supplies and anything of that nature, invoices, travel authorizations, reimbursement forms, any receipts that are required when you travel. So when we talk about the policies and procedures, we're going to talk a bit about that. Just anything of that nature, anything that is a source documentation to what is being spent on the grant. For us, we don't require the grantees to submit them to us. We don't require like timesheets to be submitted with drawdowns, or we don't require general ledgers to be submitted with the drawdown request, but we do recommend that the organization keeps that information close to them in their records. So that way they can easily see, okay, we requested X amount of money. These were the expenses related to that drawdown. And then, like I said, you want to maintain it on file. It could be electronic. It could be hard copies, whichever is easiest for the organization. Everything now, it's more and more online. Everything now has become more, electronic. So if it's easier that the organization save it there, so be it. If they want to keep it papers, so be it, but just make sure that the organization has it and is able to pull that information easily. So, do we have any questions from here?
Thanks, Michael. So Rebecca was asking, she said, I know we need to contact Just Grants and ASAP directly, but I have not received responses when I contact them. Do you know when their systems will be up and running so we can submit our FSRs? And so I just wanted to say, Rebecca, thank you for your patience, and everybody, thank you for your patience. So the FSRs are submitted in Just Grants. They are currently working on the fix with the FSRs, but when everything is ready for them to be submitted in Just Grants, grantees will receive communication from OVW letting everyone know that they're ready. The next question from Rebecca as well. Okay, good to know. Just to clarify, I shouldn't try to submit anything until I hear from them. And that is correct. Grantees will receive communication when they are ready to be submitted. It is my understanding that nobody can currently submit their FSRs, but they're working on fixes every single hour of every day. So when we hear from them that they are ready, that we will send out that communication. And for a different Rebecca, if anyone has suggestions on budget tracking platforms they are happy with, I'd love to hear them. I'm currently tracking using old school Excel spreadsheets. I am interested in hearing about other tools folks use. Thanks. And so I thank you, Rebecca, for starting that conversation. And we can check to see if the TA provider can help facilitate this discussion amongst grantees after the presentation. And one of the things that is tough because you know, we're not in an in-person setting where you could just finish this, we can finish this presentation and you can go off and have this conversation with your counterparts around the country in one conference room. So, you know, I understand that, you know, this is one of the things that gets lost with having the everything virtual. But if, you know, hopefully our TA provider can help put people in contact to have that conversation, or maybe if Rebecca can reach out to the TA provider, we'll discuss it on the side, and hopefully we can have that conversation. And there are a couple more questions. I'm going to respond to them in the chat box, and then during the next break we can go through the responses as well. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you, Suhaila. Like I said, keep bringing in the questions. These are great questions, so feel free to continue sending in your questions. All right, so now we are moving forward into policies and procedures. So here we're going to talk about kind of what the organizations should be looking to do with their policies and procedures. So one of the common findings that I indicated earlier was that organizations have incomplete, out-of-date, or inadequately enforced policies and procedures. So that's what we say, this is why we included this in our presentation, because we've seen these findings more and more, and we want to make sure that our grantees have good policies and procedures in place. Not just that they have them written and they're just there, but they're also enforcing it properly, that they're updating it at a periodical basis, and that it's fully completed based on their organization. So some of the topics that are included in policies and procedures would be these that follow: conflict of interest, how organizations are going to handle conflicts of interest, cost allocations and any methodology that they have for cost allocations, segregations of duties, cash management, personnel time and attendance or time and effort, their travel policies, their subrecipient and contractor determinations, and any policies in regards to working with subrecipients or contractors, procurement, reporting, subrecipient monitoring and management, if they have any equipment or inventory, which, I mean, for these grants is very rare, but if you do, you want to make sure you have something in that. Record retention and conference costs, if you have that as well. And again, these are just some of the topics. Every organization is different, so you want to make sure that you are creating policies and procedures that is, one, able to be completed by able to be enforced by your organization. You don't want to create some policies and procedures that that may be for an organization, you know, I would say maybe a policy and procedure that's for an organization maybe like 2 or 3 times your size, or some policies that is not created for your organization. So it's always important to know, you know, when you work on that, or if you're updating your current policies and procedures, you want to make sure that it is done at the point that your organization is able to handle. So like I said, has to be complete, has to be comprehensive. You want to document it, whether it's printed out, written, saved electronically. You have to have a copy of it, updated regularly. That's up to the organization on how, give or take, how they want to update it. It could be updated by, you know, annually, every 2 years, or semi-annually, biannually, it just really depending on how the organization is going to be updating it, but you should have a schedule on when the organization is updating their policies. A reason why this is important is federal regulations update periodically as well. So you want to make sure that your policies and procedures also in line with the regulations. So as they update, you should be updating your policies as well. And like I said earlier, it has to be relative to your organization size and budget. You don't want to create a policy that is for an organization for an organization that is a lot bigger than yours, or if the activities to ensure that the policies are being followed will cost more than just actually running the organization, that is also a big flag right there. So you want to make sure that your policies are in line with the size of your organization. In your policies, one of the things is why it has to be comprehensive, why it should be detailed, is it should outline the rules and the methods on, basically it should break out how things are done. If you have, let's say for example, if you're creating the procedures on how to submit federal status reports, it should go from step 1 to step whatever it may be, 5, 10, from the start to the end. It should break down how the organization completes a federal financial status report. From printing it out, whether it's, this individual will be printing it out, and, the financial manager will print it out and complete it. It will then be submitted with a copy of the general ledger to the executive director. Those are just some of the examples. It should break down each of the steps. So that's why it's very important to be very detailed in your policies, because similar things, a lot of times those are some of the findings where the policy does not break down exactly how the organization is going about doing their activities. A lot of times you may go with the flow, submitting financial reports. Your financial manager may know it off the top of their head, like they don't have to see the procedures, they know how to complete it with their eyes closed. But if you have a financial monitoring visit or if OIG comes to do their audit, they're going to do a deep dive on the organization's procedures. So if they see, okay, financial manager, they did all the steps, but their policies do not reflect those steps, they may see it as, well, that's an issue because, this person is doing these activities, but there's nothing written down showing what are those activities. So like I said, it's very important that you break down the policies and procedures in that. Also, like I said, this is going to be a support financial system. Very important to have a good accounting system. It should be connected with your policies and procedures, and also with strong policies and procedures, your financial reports will be more reliable. Because again, like I said, your policy and procedures are going to break down the steps. It's going to show that we are following the steps diligently. We are following regulations. We're doing everything as it should be. Here's a procedure showing that we are. So when the financial reports are submitted, it's reliable. So when our office reviews it, if OIG reviews the financial reports, they can say, okay, they have strong internal controls, strong policies and procedures, which means their reports are more reliable, so their reports are more than likely correct because they did the proper steps to ensure that it is correct. Some of the policies identify, how to document certain things, what documents are required to be saved. Again, document. As I said, you're gonna hear so much about. If you don't remember anything from this presentation, you remember document. You want to make sure your policies have in place on what documents need to be saved, what source documentation needs to be recorded. Like, for example, timesheets, purchase orders, invoices, travel authorization, receipts, and what are the processes to submit those and record those. Again, we may not need those documents, but it's important that you have them saved in your documentation in the organization, because if it comes to a point that we do request those documents, you can easily bring them up. And like I said, maintain them on file. Hard copy or electronic copies are fine. So with policies and procedures, like I said, strong policies and procedures is one of the things that shows the organization has strong internal controls. Strong internal controls is basically sure that the organization is running effectively and efficiently. It also means that if you have strong internal controls, reports are more reliable, that they're completed properly, and that the information in those reports are reliable and consistent, and whoever is reviewing it can trust that information is correct. And the assets is to ensure that the safeguarding of the assets, i.e. the funds, are make sure that they're being safeguarded, make sure that they're being used properly, and make sure that nothing that shouldn't be done is being done. Strong internal controls make sure that you are following the laws and regulations that are in place. And they make sure that you have strong segregation of duties and there's a good checks and balances within the organization. So this is why, we put so much emphasis on policies and procedures, because strong policies and procedures, good policies, means you have good internal controls in your organizations, which means basically your organization is being ran smoothly and everything should be nice, good to go regarding your awards. So first we're going to talk about the cash management and the federal financial reports policies and procedures. So an adequate system for cash management is basically to ensure that the time of cash on hand is minimized. Basically, these grants are on a reimbursement basis, so you should be drawing down funds to cover expenses that are already incurred. So you want to make sure that the organization has good policies in place, that they don't have any cash on hand after a certain period. Usually you have to basically utilize those funds within 11 days from drawing them down. So you want to keep that cash on hand as close to zero as possible. At zero is not close to zero. We know during certain times, with the new system and everything of that nature, there may be moments where, organizations may need to draw down more than what they needed. Or, for example, organizations that may be a little bit smaller, where you have like a particular pay, you have to pay your staff, you have to pay all that, and these are your, this grant, this may be your only grant, and you need to ensure that your organization, your staff are getting paid on a timely basis. So you may have to draw down, more, you may have to draw down instead of like once a month or once a quarter, you may have to draw down, every 2 weeks or something of that nature. With the payment system, you are able to do that. The organization does not have to just draw down, once a quarter or, once or twice a month or stuff of that nature. It can be done at whatever schedule the organization deems it necessary to ensure that they keep that cash on hand at zero. So for example, if you have salary due every other week, you can set a schedule where, okay, we will be making drawdowns, on this date to ensure that we have the funds to cover our staff and their salaries, as well as the fringe and everything of that nature. And it can be done like that. It's just you want to make sure that you have documented those drawdowns, representing, okay, we are making this drawdown to cover, the salary for this date to this date or any expenses that incurred through that time. So however the organization may want to do it, the organization can, but you want to make sure that, one, you have those policies in place reflecting that, the schedule of drawdowns or how the organization is going to be handling their cash or any drawdowns of that nature. And then also, what are their policies in place for, say, for example, you drew down more than what you needed. What do we do at that point? If we, for example, you drew down $10,000 for salaries and everything of that nature. Come to find out, oh, well, we drew down, we only needed 8,000, so we have an additional 2,000. What are your policies with that additional 2,000? All right, do we have to send it back? Are we covering other expenses that were incurred during that period? Maybe supplies or a travel or something that may have occurred. You know, what are your policies to reflect those if you have excess funds or if you don't have enough? So, like, what are your policies to handle those situations? So on the FFR, like I said before, the FFR, Federal Financial Reports, should reflect what you actually spent and not just what you drew down. So a big difference with the reports now in the new system than what it was before is you are going to be reporting on the cumulative expenditures. So before, you will be reporting based on what you spent per quarter, basically, per the reporting period. With the new federal financial reports, you will be reporting what the organization has spent through that reporting period, from the start of the grant through that reporting period. So it is going to be a change in the reports. So on 10E on the reports, and I know most of the grantees probably have not seen the report yet, so you know, once you get access, once you're able to see those reports in Just Grants, if you have any questions, like I said, email us or email the Just Grant support. We can walk you through it, or we can show you kind of how it's done. In addition, there are lots of guides as well as videos on how to submit the reports and how to complete the reports. We also have that at the end of the presentation as well, with links to all those resources. So don't feel like, you know, if you feel like this is just a lot in regards to the reports that, you know, you don't know where to, you know, contact us. Like I said, contact us. We can sit down with you, walk through the reports to show you exactly how it's done, because it's important that these reports are done properly, because if they're not, then, you know, you have to come back in and make revisions and make changes. So like I said, there are reports, but just like before, the report's always going to be based on the actual expenditures. So it should be based off your general ledgers. So like I said, that's why it's important to have a good accounting system, because if your general ledgers are properly set up and it's properly indicating, you know, what were the expenses for this particular award, you can easily just pull that information up, put it into the financial status report, and then you have your general ledger as that supporting documentation, or that supportive source of the information that's indicated in the federal financial reports. Okay, so the due dates for the reports are, they're due 30 days at the end of each quarter. We know that for this particular report, for report period ending 9/30, originally it was supposed to be due at 10/30. However, with the new system and everything, they gave it an extension to November 30th. So like how Suhaila indicated earlier, they're in the process of getting the reports up and running. So, you know, the reports are not due, but as soon as the reports are up and ready to go, grantees will be notified, so they'll be able to go in and submit it. Like I said, just keep an eye out on that. Keep an eye out for any notifications from Just Grants regarding the reports. Another change that occurred is that the final report, so this is when you're getting towards the end of your grant and everything, back then it used to be 90 days from the project end date, your final report was due. Well, that is now changed in the regulations, where the final report is due 120 days from the award end date. And this is for any grant that is ending, any project end date after, I believe it's November 15th. Suhaila, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I believe there's any award after that's ending after November 15th has 120
November
days.
12th.
November 12th, I'm sorry, yes, November 12th. So yeah, so any award that's ending after November 12th will have 120 days from the project end date to submit their final reports. Any grant that is ending prior or has a project end date prior to November 12th, they have the original 90-day period. But again, if you're getting to that closeout, most of these awards will fall into the 120. So, when we get to that point, that's when the final report is due. And we'll go through that once we go to closeouts. We also have just a list on the due dates. With the systems, just like before, submit your reports on the 30th. Even though the month may end and it has the 31st, submit your reports on the 30th. For some reason, systems don't like the 31st. They don't see them as days. So you want to make sure that you are submitting your reports by the 30th of the due date month. In addition, the FFR, they're quarterly, they're submitted in Just Grants. In Just Grants, the assigned financial manager will be the individual that will be submitting these reports in Just Grants. So whoever you assign to that is a particular person that will be submitting these reports, and these reports will be done at a quarterly basis. Excuse me. So next, we're going to go into the travel policies and procedures. So with the travel policies and procedures, just like everything else, it needs to be documented, and the organization needs to ensure that they're following these policies and procedures. If you don't have any, or if you're working on creating some, you should refer to the GSA federal regulations. Us as federal employees, that's what we follow. So it's always good to look at that GSA federal regulations and use that as a guide. Usually that's what, those are the requirements for policies can be at that level or even stricter when you're creating your policies. Also, you want to make sure if your state has any regulations or anything of that nature, again, that's organization, but you also want to take that into account. It's with travel, again, my three favorite words, favorite word, just saying it 3 times, document, document, document. It's important to keep all your supportive documentation. Like I said, your travel authorization, basically approving your travel before you leave. After you get back from your travel, the reimbursement form, the expense report, and with that, any receipts. So like for us, we have to provide, when we get back with our reimbursement, we have to include our airfare, receipt of the airfare, any baggage claims, any receipts of that, the receipt of the hotel, if we had to park at the airport, those receipts, if we had to take a taxi to the airport or from the airport to the hotel. Basically, at least I know myself, try to keep almost every receipt related to the travel that I had during the particular travel, like anything, so that way I have it just in case what they need. Like I said, your organization will create that policy in reflection of what is necessary. If you feel like we will need every single receipt for every dollar spent during the travel that's related to the particular travel, outside of personal expenses, if that's your policies, those are your policies. So you need to ensure that that is included in there. And like I said, it's important that you have, when it comes to your travel authorization and your reimbursement forms, another thing is how are they being approved? So before you leave for travel, if who needs to submit the travel authorization, by when do they need to submit it to, when is the deadline to submit it, who approves it, all of that needs to be included in these policies and procedures. Excuse me. So when it comes to receipts, one thing is not a supportive documentation or sufficient supporting documentation is credit card receipts, or credit card statements, I'm sorry. Credit card statements is just not enough. You need to have a copy of the receipts. Sometimes, you may have lost it, or, or it might have gotten mixed up or anything of that nature, you may have to follow back up either with the hotel, follow back up with the airline, follow back up with the parking, anything of that nature. You want to make sure you have some type of documentation reflecting that this expense occurred and this is related to that. Like, let's say, for example, you go to airport parking, it's, you got an early flight, it's like 5 a.m. in the morning. Let's say the airport parking meter thing doesn't have any paper, so it doesn't print out a receipt. So you're like, well, how can I document that? Like, there's no one here. How do I get some type of source documentation? You may have to be creative with it. It may just be that you take a picture of the little scanner machine or anything of that nature. You may want to document it, something to show reflective that, hey, this was spent. If you do just submit the credit card statement or just showing that cost, you have to have something else connected to it if it comes to the point that you don't have a receipt. So I guess let me just rephrase when I say copies of the credit card statements is not sufficient. Solely the credit card statement is not sufficient. Like I said, if there comes an example where you're unable to obtain a copy of a receipt for whatever reason, like you absolutely exhausted all the other options to obtain this receipt and you cannot get a copy of it, it may just be that, but you also want to have something else connected to the statement. Like I said, whether it's a picture, whether it is, I don't know, I've seen they go another day and they take a picture, or they show like a receipt on another day, but just showing like it's the same cost. Just showing that, okay, I was not able to get the receipt, but here is some type of proof that I was actually there and this expense was for this item. So yeah, so like I was saying in regards to approval before and after your travel. So like I said, the travel authorization, when does the approval need to happen? I.e., when do the staff members need to submit their request? Like by what date before the travel? Whether they have to submit it 2 weeks before the travel comes or a month before, just to allow enough time to let the proper personnel approve it. Like I said, who approves it? Is it the ED? Is it the financial manager and then the ED? What are the steps for approving it? How are the approvals obtained? What is your, the routing system within the organization? Like I said, does it go from staff to financial manager to ED or whatever it may be? And then what do they need to include in that authorization? I know for us, we got to submit a itinerary as well as like the agenda of the travel. So we're going to a training, we need to include the agenda of the training. Some may want to see, if you book your airline, if you book your airfare, most times you have to pay it at the date that you book it. You submit a copy of that, what you booked with the airline, with the airfare. Hotel, same thing, a copy of, it may be that, like a copy of the hotel being reserved to show that these are the times you're going to be there. So just whatever it's needed, the organization may feel like they need, or even like a breakdown of the cost. Now, maybe the staff member just needs to include, this is what we're going to spend on airfare, this is what we're going to spend on hotel, this is what we expect to spend on taxi, because, you never know what may happen when you land or anything of that nature. This is what we expecting to pay for parking if you have to park at the airport. Just those different things you want to take into account when it comes to the approval of the travel. And then when you get back, all right, you did your travel, you went to the training, if we were out and about traveling right now, we will be, you had a great time with GFMD during our presentation, and you got back and you're like, yo, I learned so much from GFMD. I remember them saying when we get back from our travel, we have to submit a reimbursement form back to our organization. What needs to be included in that reimbursement? What are the documentation that they needed? What are the receipts that needs to be included? What is the information that needs to be included on the form itself? Like, do you include, how long did you stay? Where did you stay? well, you may say, again, if the agenda updated, you might want to include a copy of the updated agenda. Those different things of that nature. And then also, how long do you have to submit, or how long do your staff have to submit their reimbursement? You want to make sure that you get those reimbursements in, as soon as you get back, because all the expenses are still fresh in your mind. Because, while you're going through that process, you may say, okay, here's my airfare. Oh shoot, I remember I had to check in a bag because, I had to check in a bag because the bag was bigger than a carry-on. So I did have I had a baggage claim. My taxi, I got to remember I had the taxi receipt because, we had to take a detour. We couldn't get to the airport in time, so we had to take a detour. Whatever it may be, you want to make sure you do it as soon as you get back, because the expenses and everything are still fresh in your mind, so you can easily go back and say, okay, these were the expenses, and make sure everything is right on the reimbursement, so your staff can get paid back, can get reimbursed for their travel, and then, everything is being counted properly. All right. So next, we're going to talk about personnel time and attendance. So basically the time and efforts, time and activities, and how to track all of that information and policies in regards to that. So your time and effort on your grant should be clearly documented. That is, whether it's through a timesheet, whether it's through an activity report, something of that nature to reflect that the staff member worked on this grant, and kind of brief description of what they were doing on this grant. Some grantees may have only one award, so that person is working 100% on this award. So your timesheet would just be one award. You can still have an activities report included with that. It could be just a brief narrative of just, okay, during this day, this individual staff member worked on financial status report, or this staff member was, this person was out on the field. Like, just something to reflect that, okay, this person worked these hours and what they were doing during these hours. Again, the amount charged needs to match the documentation. So if you have a timesheet, the person worked X amount of hours at this rate, that timesheet or that amount should match what is indicated in the general ledger. If that does not match, I mean, there's something wrong at that point. So you want to make sure that what is indicated in the timesheet, it properly matches what's being charged to the grant and what's being included in the general ledger. Like I said before, charges need to be based on actual costs, not budgeted. So again, the time they actually spent on the grant, instead of what you budgeted them to get paid. You should not be charged. You should not be charging the grant based solely on budgeted. It should be based on the actual time. Of course, you want to make sure the activities, your timesheet should be your entire timesheet or the staff member's timesheet should be reflective of their total activities, federal and non-federal. But like I said, this is where it's important to reflect what are all the funding sources. So in that timesheet should reflect, okay, this person worked 80 hours total during a 2-week period, but they have worked maybe 40 hours on the OVW grant, 20 hours on state grant, and 20 hours on general or another grant. So you want to be able, that timesheet needs to be reflective of the entire activity, but it has to be broken down by their funding sources. Of course, you got to have proper policies and procedures in place, basically reflecting on how staff members will be completing their timesheets and activities, similar to like the travel documents and everything. When they submit their timesheets, who approves their timesheets, who approves the ED's timesheets, if, because the ED can't approve their own timesheet. What are the policies if timesheets need to be corrected? Is there a particular time frame? Just different things like that. You want to make sure that you include in your policies that is being covered. And ensure, internal controls is there to ensure that there is accuracy within the timesheets. Because if they follow the policies and procedures properly, the timesheet should be reflective as accurately as possible, which means the grant will be charged properly. There isn't we don't have a, standard timesheet or time and activities report, but if you do contact our help desk, we can send over some examples, some sample timesheets. We have different types, some detailed, some a bit more basic, but we do have examples of it. If any of you all would like a copy of them, just email our help desk and we can send a copy right over. Okay, so we'll leave this time open for any questions that may have came in.
Thanks, Michael. So there was a question that Rebecca actually had earlier about budget tracking, and if there was anybody who had something that they would recommend. And Shondell, she provided some feedback, said that they use QuickBooks Premium, and we are able to track over 20 different grant programs using the class feature. So thank you very much, Shondell, for your feedback. That was super helpful. Thank you. And I am also compiling these questions, and I'll send them over to the TA provider to continue the conversation offline, just as an FYI for everybody. Carrie asked, and she's one of the program managers, Carrie asked that a question just received from one of the grantees, if the available balance for their award in ASAP appears as $0, is that because their budget has not been approved by OVW, or is there another issue that they need to contact ASAP about? And so I think that it would be a good idea to contact the GFMD help desk in this situation, because the budget holds all funds with the exception of $10,000. So it might be because there's another special condition holding all funds, or there might be something else related to the systems migration. I'm not sure. So in this case, it might be a good idea to contact the GFMD help desk, and we can look into it a little bit further. Then we have another question from Vincent. Can you please elaborate on the 10% of budget for moving funds between line items? Is it 10% of budget for each separate budget line item or total? And it is when you move 10% of the cumulative award amount amongst categories. So if your award is $300,000 and you move $30,000 from the, for example, contracts and consultants category over to the personnel category, then you would need to come in for a budget mod GAM. So it's when you move that amount amongst the categories, not within one category from one line item to another. Gail had a question. Would you please differentiate between a subawardee and a contractor? And I believe that's actually in the next section that we're about to go on to. I'm like 99% sure. But regardless, yep. We do have a whole section on that. And if you still have any questions, Gail, afterwards, please feel free to ask them during that section. Thank you. And Rebecca said, along the lines of asking if anyone has platforms that they like, if anyone has policies, procedures, or accounting manuals or samples of such that they recommend, she'd be interested. No need to reinvent the wheel. That's always a good idea. So I think that's a great question, and we're going to add this to the list of topics for a conversation for post-presentation. So thank you, Rebecca. Question from Gail, can we still limit our reporting to actual expenditures and not take a drawdown in excess of that? I wasn't sure, so we're getting additional clarification. And I think that that's it right now. If you have any, I actually did receive a couple of questions, and I'll answer them in the next series of questions and answers. Thank you, Michael.
Yep, thank you, Suela. Yeah, so like we were saying before, it's very good to communicate with one another. Like Suela said, no purpose of reinventing the wheel. Working with each other a lot of times just makes it a whole lot easier, especially with policies and procedures, because there may be another organization out there that has policies and procedures similar to yours where you can just update it and it makes life so much easier. Okay, So now we are going to move into the fun part of our presentation. We are going into subrecipient and contractors. This part is going to be a lot. So again, any questions, anything, please add them in the Q&A box. If something is a little confusing, like I said, just put them in there. We will try to get to all the questions. But this part it's a bit more, and we're going to get through it and everything. And like I said before, if you have any more detailed or more direct questions that you may not feel like you want to add into the Q&A, contact us directly and we will get back to you. So with the subrecipient and contractors, basically there are two agreements that the organizations may go into with another organization. You either may have a subaward or you may have a contract. So a subaward basically is you are working with or partnering with an organization to carry out the program activities, whereas a contract or contractor, you are procuring goods or services, that's also included like consultants to provide you like goods or services. So usually an example we always use for contractors are like website designers, bookkeepers to do like the financial bookkeeping and stuff like that nature. They said consultants and stuff of that nature. Subawards usually, and we will have a breakdown and determination a bit later, but a lot of times they may be seen as like your MOU partner. That's not always the case because it's always important to do the determination, but most times that's what they do see as a subrecipient or a subaward. It is very important to make the determination of the partner of the relationship because each of them has their own responsibilities. Subaward, comes monitoring and ensuring that it's being done properly. A contract, you have a contract. You need to ensure, you're paying these individuals or these organizations to provide goods and services. You need to ensure that, one, the goods and services are provided, and two, they are, the contract is being upheld. So it's very important to have an understanding of what that agreement is and make that determination. So what is a subrecipient? So from the Uniform Administrative Requirements to CFR Part 200, subrecipient means a non-federal entity that receives a subaward from a pass-through entity, which would be your organization, to carry out part of a federal program, but does not include an individual that is a beneficiary of such program. A subrecipient may also be a recipient of other federal awards directly from a federal awarding agency. So that's why I said, most times it may look like your MOU partner because your MOU partner most likely is like another organization doing activities or may have their own federal awards. So a subrecipient could be an organization of that nature. A contractor receives a contract which is a legal instrument by which a non-federal entity purchases property or services needed to carry out the project or program under a federal award. The terms as used in this part does not include a legal instrument, even if the non-federal entity considers it a contract. Basically what this is, like I said, you're a contractor, you are getting into a contract or an agreement for that contractor to provide either goods or services to the organization. Again, these are general, this could be most times general goods, services. The biggest example that comes up to my head is like website designers, bookkeepers and stuff of that nature. So So we do recommend that the organizations do develop a policy, some type of checklist to make this determination, to make sure that they're doing it properly when they make that determination whether this organization that you're partnering with is a subrecipient or a contractor. Again, this is important because there are certain requirements needed that needs to be done for subrecipients, and there are requirements needed to be done for contractors. So you want to make sure that you follow the checklist to make sure that you're determining these partners as the proper either subrecipient or contractor. So here is just a list of kind of like a graph of like what is considered a subrecipient and a contractor. These are just some of the things. This is not the sole determination of a subrecipient and a contractor, like I said. But these, for the most part, if they they check most of these boxes, these will probably help in regards to determining what is a subrecipient and a contractor. Like I said before, MOU partners are usually considered a subrecipient. They've received federal funding or they follow federal regulations, terms and agreements do apply to them. If they meet the threshold to submit to FAFSA, that plays into part. If they're being reimbursed for actual costs. Usually a contractor the agreement is they provide the services, you pay them for the services. So, whereas a subrecipient or a subaward is you're paying them based on the activities done. So like similar to like how your grants are paid based on the activities done, the actual cost, the subrecipients are being paid at that same basis. And then whereas contractors, they have to follow the procurement standards, they follow part of the contract provisions under the administrative requirements, and also contractors, they will gain a profit. So they have fees. Like I said, if you have a contract with them, so the contract may say, we're going to provide X services at this rate, this is our fee, and then if the agreement is, if the contract is signed and agreed upon, that is the fee that they will receive. Whereas subrecipients, it's more of, like I said, they get paid by the actual cost to complete the activities. So like time and activities, if they need supplies, even if the subrecipients need to travel or something of that nature, that's all included as actual cost. Okay, so we're going to leave it open for questions for this part. We still got some more on subrecipients and contractors, but we're going to first allow some questions that may have come in.
Okay, Michael. So I am responding to one of the grantees' questions from Karen. So she said that she didn't understand the answer about moving 10%. It was Vincent's question from earlier. So is it okay to move less than $30,000 using those same figures in my example? Or are we talking about moving 10% of the telephone expense to another category? So if you want to move $30,000 or more, you need to modify the budget. So just to clarify, so I just want to make sure that, we repeat that there are 3 different changes that a grantee can make that may trigger the budget modification GAM. And the first one is, yes, the cumulative change of 10% or more within already approved categories. The next one is moving funds into a category that wasn't previously in the budget. So if you had $0 for supplies and you move $100 to supplies, then that would trigger the GAM. And the third is changing the scope, and that's when there's more of a substantive change to the project. So for the 10% specifically, that would refer to if you are actually moving that amount of money. So if your award is $300,000 and 10% of $300,000 is $30,000, so if you are moving $30,000, let's say if you take $15,000 from consultants and you take $15,000 from other and you move 30, so 15 plus 15, you move $30,000 into personnel, that's 10% of your total award amount that's being moved. And so in that case, a budget mod GAM would be required. If there are any, because I know that it's hard with not having the, back and forth during the presentation. So if you still need additional help or assistance with this question, I encourage you to contact the help desk, and we can facilitate more of a conversation about that. Gail had a question about whether or not an MOU is sufficient for a sub-awardee, or is an actual written contract needed? And that's actually a great question, Gail. Generally, MOU agreements, that they don't necessarily contain the level of information that is required for a sub-award document. And I think, Michael, have you gone through yet the requirements for pass-through entities yet, or is that coming right up?
That's coming right up.
Okay, super. So just to keep that in mind as Michael goes through that section, you want to make sure that whatever document you have that stipulates the terms of the agreement with either a sub-awardee or with a contractor, that document contains all of the elements that are required for that agreement type. So for a sub-award, Mike will go over the section in the CFR that lists out what is actually required to be contained in that agreement, that contract, or whatever agreement tool you're using. And a lot of times MOUs do not contain sufficient level of information for that, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. And there are a couple more questions, but I will let you, Michael, go through the next section, and I'll keep answering them, and then we'll discuss them in the next section, next Q&A. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Suhaila. All right. So next, actually, the next part is the procurement policies and procedures, and after that is going to be the subrecipient monitoring and everything. So with the procurement is the process used to obtain the goods and services from an outside vendor. So this is your procurement process for getting a contractor. Of course, your policies will need to be documented. Under the 2 CFR 200.318 to 200.327 has the information for the procurement process. Once you pull up the Uniform Administration, you can do like a Control F and just type in the 200.313, and it will take you right to it. In addition to that, when you're doing your procurement process, you want to make sure that you're checking SAMS.gov for the vendor or the consultant prior to issuing the contract. You want to make sure that they don't have any disbarment or anything of that nature. It's always good to do a double check in SAMS. That is something, we check the grantees as some of the pre-award risk assessment, and you as the grantee should do it as well when you're going into an agreement with a contractor, as well as the subrecipients. You want to make sure that there isn't any conflict of interest, and if there is, you have, of course, your policies on how you're going to handle conflicts of interest. Of course, you have to be consistent throughout the organization, regardless of federal or non-federal funds. Your policies for procurement should be consistent throughout your entire organization. And of course, you got to have free and open competition when you go into these contractors. I know sometimes in more rural areas or more smaller areas that may be a little more difficult because of the location, and it may just be that there might be just one person or one person or organization or two of them that provide the goods and services that the organization may need. You just want to make sure that you are doing the due diligence to ensure that if you are going to be utilizing that individual organization, that you at the very least, have a reasoning for it, supportive reasoning for it, or if needed, reach out beyond your area to see if the cost will be beneficial to get someone outside of the area, cost-benefit analysis in regards to that. Also, you want to make sure if you are, and I think with this particular award, it doesn't come up as often, but it's still something to keep in the back of your mind. If you are purchasing or leasing vehicles, you want to make sure you do a lease versus purchase analysis. Just compare those costs. just to see which one would be more cost beneficial to the organization. Of course, you want to maintain records, document everything in regard to your procurement process. You, of course, will need to obtain prior approval for any sole source contracts. So basically, that's any contract that's over $250,000. Again, those are also, you don't see that too often, but if it comes to that point that you have a contract for over $250,000, you will need to submit a sole source GAM to get prior approval. In the contract, it should outline the payment terms, how the organization is paying for these services, whether it is, however it may be. Maybe it is you pay, a deposit at the beginning and a payment at the end, whether it is, you do check-ins quarterly, however it may be, the organization should, in the contract, indicate what will be the payment terms, and if there will be any like benchmarks or check-ins to ensure, they are completing the requested services to obtain payments. And also you want to make sure that there aren't any unnecessary or duplicate items in regards to procurement or your contract. If it's something that the organization is doing themselves, that you're not charging it twice. If it's an activity or if it's a service or something of that nature that the organization is already doing, and then you're going out and getting a contract to do that same activity, and you're still paying both, that's, you're just doing the same thing and paying it twice. So just want to make sure that, whatever contract you are obtaining is for something that the organization is not doing or is being duplicated if you're getting two contractors or anything of that nature. In addition, that will fall also consultants. When you are hiring consultants, you must take into consideration a reasonable rate of compensation for the consultants. You need to ensure that, the rate that they're charging is, is deemed reasonable, and if it seems to be a bit high, that it's necessary to complete the objectives of the program, or it's something that is really necessary. So you want to make sure you do at least some research on the rates, kind of see what other consultants may be charging, or you may follow up with other organizations around your area or other organizations in this award, in this program, and they say, hey, we're looking into this consultant, they charging X rate, is this a common rate, or is this a competitive rate in this field or for this type of consultant? So it's always important to do your research before just agreeing on a consultant rate, because just because they say, hey, we're charging, $2,000, $1,000 to $2,000 a day, you don't have to say yes, we're going to do that. You have to also do your due diligence and your proper research to ensure that, if they request a certain amount, that it is, one, reasonable, and also something that the organization can pay. And we all know, we've seen it before, we always, it pops up, the $650 per day or the $81.25. This is not an OVW or a DOJ standard rate. This is not like a standardized, it's not like a set rate. This is a threshold rate. Basically what this is, what this amount is, that if the organization or if the grantee is obtaining a consultant beyond $650 per day for an 8-hour day or $81.25 an hour, they are required to obtain prior approval. So that does not mean that the grantee cannot go out and obtain a consultant that may be charging more than the $650 per day. That just means that you will need to obtain prior approval to hire this particular consultant. If you come into those situations where you have a consultant that they're saying, their rate is beyond the $650 and the organization cannot get it below that threshold rate, follow up with your program manager. Just, contact program manager and kind of say, hey, I have this contractor that is this particular rate, and you're going to want to submit documentation showing, one, their rate, reflecting their rate. You also want to provide a description on the reasoning why the organization needs to or wants to hire this consultant at this rate, and how is it beneficial to the program. And then also if there's any other supportive documentation related to this consultant. So again, like I said, this $650 per day is not a standard rate. It is not a rate that all consultants have to get paid. If the consultant's rate is lower than $650, then you pay them at that rate. If it's higher, and sometimes some consultants may say, hey, you know, our rate is higher than X amount, you know, our rate may be $800 a day, but, you know, because we'll work with you and we'll get it at $650, you want to also take that into account. You know, you want to make sure that whether or not you are partnering up with these consultants and everything, that you're doing the due diligence in regards to the reasonable rate, and the $650 per day is not just a standard rate, so they just say, oh yeah, I want to get paid $650 no matter what. So again, if it comes to the point that you have a consultant that, you know, they're requesting more than that, and you kind of, you know, you kind of want to see, what do I need, or, you know, what do I need to get approved for it, contact the program manager or contact us at GFMD, and we can discuss it in further detail and kind of see, you know, what needs to be submitted to get approval for it. All right, so next we are going to go into subawards and subrecipients, basically how to manage them and how to monitor them if you are getting into an agreement with a subaward. So as a pass-through entity, so that is your organization, you are the pass-through entity, there are requirements that you have to follow. In the Uniform Administrative Requirements, 2 CFR 200.332, that's where it breaks down the agreement of a subaward and the pass-through entity. It clearly breaks down what is needed in the agreement, the bare minimum of what's needed, as well as the monitoring requirements as a pass-through entity. It does break down what, as a pass-through entity, what are your responsibilities. So one of the things is, just how like our office or our office has to do our pre-award risk assessment of the grantees, you as a pass-through entity have to do that same type of, or some type of risk assessment of the subrecipient that you are partnering with. So that's why it's important to review those uniform administrative requirements. As a pass-through entity, you're going to have to check the subrecipient's prior history. You have to see if they've had other subawards, if they've gotten other federal awards or something of that nature, and how they went about it. You want to review if they've gotten, you know, from their previous audits, you know, what were the results of their audits? Did they have any findings? Were those findings resolved? And if so, you know, what were those findings and were they resolved? Whether the subrecipient has personnel or some type of accounting system or some type of system in place. Do they have policies and procedures in place themselves? Also, are they able or are they capable to provide the services or the, not the services, are they able to provide, the services to complete the program activities that you are partnering them with? Do they have the capability? Do they have enough personnel? Do they have systems in place to ensure that they can complete these activities? All these things you have to take in account as a pass-through entity, because you need to ensure that they are able to, one, complete the activities, and two, ensure that they're doing it at a proper method, a proper way. Just like how we need to ensure you as a grantee are utilizing our grant funds properly, you need to ensure that those subawards are utilizing the funds properly as well. Similar to, like I said, you wanted to make sure you're checking their SAMs. You want to make sure, and that's a correction on there, but you want to make sure that you're checking the subrecipients' SAMs.gov, checking their DUNS if they have any disbarment or anything of that nature. Like I said, you know, we check it for all our grantees. As a pass-through entity, you should be checking it for your subrecipients as well. In addition to the agreement with the subrecipients, you can add additional special conditions. You can, if you want to add certain things, they have to meet certain requirements to get paid, or they need to ensure that they're submitting reports by a certain time, or if you need to get progress reports and financial reports. You may say it has to be at the same level as hours, where it has to be quarterly for the financial reports, semi-annually for the programmatic reports. Include that in the agreement with the subawards. Of course, if they are audit, if they fall into the audit requirements, include that as well. You also, like I said, if you are reviewing the subrecipient's audits or anything of that nature, you want to make sure you keep a record of that to see if they had any findings or anything, and kind of get documentation from the subrecipients on what were their corrective action plans and how they resolved those findings, and if they haven't resolved it, what are they doing to resolve those issues? So that's something that you want to take in consideration. Like I said before, you want to have proper monitoring activities to ensure that the subrecipients are, one, completing the activities properly and also spending the funds properly. And if there's any audit compliance that they have to follow, as indicated in subpart F of the administrative requirements. And then also in the agreement with the subrecipients, you want to include any enforcement actions that may need to be taken. So if there is non-compliance, if the subrecipient is not following the agreement, what are the actions that the organization is going to take? Whether it's terminating the agreement, whether it's subrecipient needs to pay back X amount of funds, whether you're going to put them on, similar to how we may put grantees on a high risk, you may put them on some type of restriction, so they may not be able to obtain any funds, or they won't be reimbursed for funds until the particular issue or the particular non-compliance hasn't been resolved. So these are the kind of things you want to take in consideration. Like I said, in the Uniform Administrative Requirements, it breaks that down. It's extremely detailed, so I would say, like I said, check the 2 CFR 200.332, where it breaks down the pass-through entities requirements and what are your responsibilities. So like I said, one of the responsibilities of the pass-through entity is subrecipient monitoring. You want to ensure that you are monitoring the activities of your subrecipient to ensure that the award is being utilized for the intended purposes. A subrecipient is basically receiving the same funds as the pass-through entity is receiving. We as OVW, we're granting your organization the funds, and then you are passing through some of those funds to another organization, the subaward, the subrecipient. So you want to make sure that they are following the proper rules and regulations of those funds, because they, just how you have certain requirements to follow, they're going to have those same requirements have to follow. So that's why it's important to have good monitoring in place. Good ways to review their performance, so to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and achieving their goals, to ensure they're complying with any federal regulations or any other regulations that they need to follow, to ensure that they're following the terms and conditions of the awards, to make sure they're not, non-compliant with any of those conditions or anything of the award. So like I said, some of the things of subrecipient monitoring would be reviewing, financial and performance reports, addressing any deficiencies that were identified in audits. Like I said before, you check their audits, they may have certain deficiencies, they may have certain findings. How are they going about resolving these findings, and have these findings been resolved, and ensuring that doesn't occur again, especially during the time that they are a subrecipient with your organization. And then also ensuring that management, ensuring that your organization has also been in communication with that subrecipient on how they are resolving any audit findings, like I said. So it's just about making sure that those subrecipients are following, just like how you as the primary recipient have to follow all your terms and conditions and your federal regulations and compliance to the program. those recipients have to follow the same thing, and you are responsible to ensure that they are following those requirements. Again, depending on the results of your risk assessment, you may want to include additional monitoring requirements. You may want to have the subrecipient participate in training or TA events, different type of things of that nature. You might want to do on-site monitoring. With those subrecipients, you may have to set certain times that you as the primary recipient are going to go into the office or virtually have monitoring sit-downs with the subrecipient. Any agreed upon procedures with the engagement. Any additional monitoring activities that may need to be added to the subrecipient can be added. Like I said, you as the primary recipient are responsible for these subrecipients. So if something is non-compliant or something is off with them, it's going to fall back to you as a primary recipient. So you want to make sure that you have proper monitoring procedures in place to ensure that those subrecipients are following the regulations, are being compliant, and making sure that they are completing the goals and objectives of the program. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up for questions that anyone may have in relations to the contracts and consultants or any other questions that may have come up.
Thanks, Michael. So Shelley Miller said that they realized timesheets should be signed for the executive director, but during these times, can a timesheet be approved by email with the email attached to this timesheet? So thanks for your question, Shelley. If you don't have an electronic timesheet system, it sounds like it might be a reasonable workaround considering our current circumstances. Make sure that the person signing it can attest to the time and work performed by the staff person and that your policies and procedures are updated to reflect this change. But I think what might be a better workaround would be to maybe have it signed and then scanned and sent back just so that their signature is on there. And like I know we have an electronic system where we have to enter our password, and that's kind of attesting that this is the person who is sending it, and that's what the timesheet and the signature is for, just to make sure that that is the person that's validating it. So if they can, I think what might be a good solution is to just have them sign it and then scan it and send it back. A question from Cordelia is, will the closed captioning transcripts and these Q&A be available as text files after this training? And I believe it will. And Sarah, if you can assist with distributing this after the presentation to the attendees, that would be helpful. Thank you. Karen had a follow-up question about the budget modifications and when the DM is required. I think I went over this actually during the last session, but I put it in writing over here for anybody who wanted to see. And sorry, let's make sure I'm not missing anything. Gail asked, is an MOU sufficient for a subawardee, or is an actual written contract needed? Michael, did I go over this during the last session, last set of questions?
Yes, you went through it a bit. But yeah,
okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I could go back to let me go back to the slide, because I know we said it about in regards to the agreement. Let me go back.
You're right, I'm sorry. I didn't want to have to go to...
Oh, no, you're fine, yeah.
Too much. So yeah, so if just double check, make sure that your MOUs or whatever document you're using contains all the elements that are required for that, for a subrecipient agreement. Just make sure that it contains everything. And if you look at it today, I don't think that so the reference is to CFR 200.332. If you look at it today, it might still say 331, but we just updated it because it's supposed to be changing on Thursday, on November 12th. So it may still be 331, so just as a side note. But it is a section for past due requirements for subawards. Okay, Leslie asked if there's anything in writing from OVW that indicates that subrecipients do not require sole source procurement. And so I just wanted to maybe go over this real quickly. So procurement procedures, that is strictly just for contracts and procurement. That is, it's not for subawards, for issuing subawards. So the sections for issuing or for when you make procurements, that section is 200.318 through 200.327. So that's a completely different section that if you have, evaluated the nature of the agreement with this partner or this organization or company, and you feel that it most closely aligns with a contract, then you follow your procurement procedures, and sole source is within 2 CFR 200 under the section for procurements. I don't remember the exact number, but it's between 318 and 327, as you can see on the slide. So sole source is discussed in that exact section, and that only applies to contracts. Now, on the other hand, if you determine that the nature of the services most closely aligns with a subaward, then you would follow the requirements for issuing subawards or the requirements for pass-through entities, which is 2 CFR 200.332. So there are completely different requirements for contracts and subawards, which is why it is so important that you, from the beginning, make your evaluation to determine, are you issuing a subaward or are you issuing a contract? Like how are those services most closely aligning to one or the other? Because you're going to have different procedures to follow and different federal requirements to follow based off of issuing a contract versus issuing a subaward. So sole source only applies to contracts. So if you're issuing a subaward, that does not apply. You do not need to come in for sole source approval. And one other thing, just to expand on that conversation a little bit, is that subawards, as Michael was explaining earlier, you're only paying them for their actual direct costs that they incur as a result of their participation on this project. So you're just paying them for their actual salaries for their staff who are working their percentage of time on this grant. Just like how you would ask us for reimbursement for your activities, they're doing the same thing to you. They're not giving you a hourly rate that they are just charging you that includes the person's time, but also includes overhead, also includes the profit margin, all those other pieces that they would say, okay, $75 an hour for this work. They're actually saying, okay, this advocate worked 10% of their time at of a $40,000 salary, that this was the amount of their time that we're charging. This is their proportionate fringe benefits for that same activities worked. So you're paying them you're reimbursing them for their actual costs that they're incurring. So that's why it's very different from a contract, which they do have the potential to earn profit. They do have, that they'll charge you with an hourly rate that is all encompassing of those different types of costs that they're incurring. And the subaward, you're just paying them for their direct costs. So that's why they're also very different. Sheila had a question. So procurement standards, including competition and sole source approval, do not apply for subrecipients. Is that correct? And the same thing that we just talked about just now. And if you want to see that in writing, it's right there as well. And D. Robles asked, regarding procurement, the consultant's rate has been $81.25 for a long time and has not changed. Do you have information regarding this mandated amount and which governing body sets the amount? Thank you. I don't have that information. That's not a conversation that I've ever unfortunately been involved in. I do know that like our other components, DOJ components like OJP, that they just raised recently their threshold to $81.25 an hour or $650 a day. So I mean, and they make a lot more awards than we do. So I don't know that amount is changing, and unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't have any other information related to that. And Gail asked, can we use a finding by the state that the subgrantee is in good standing with regard to financial capacity assessments, audits, etc., rather than requiring our own assessment? So Gail, I think that is a good tool to use as part of your assessment. I don't think that it is prudent to use that instead of your own assessment. I do think that it's important for your organization to develop an evaluation process for making that determination of any potential risk that a subrecipient might pose. And I mean, you can look to other types of, questions that you see that are out there. Like, we ask you those same questions with those 10 pre-award risk assessment questions to gain an understanding of your organization's financial management systems and, what your capacity is and what your previous history has been with, audits. And we have a set of questions that we ask you, and we also have a list of other things that we look at as well, which Michael went through in the presentation. But take a look at 2 CFR 200.332, the section for pass-through requirements for pass-through entities. Like I said, it might be 331 right this second, but it's requirements for pass-through entities is the section. And just take a look there and see what those are listed as, and develop that based off of the federal requirements, please. And the reason why I also emphasize that is just because, at the end of the day, the direct recipient or the pass-through entity who's issuing the subaward is going to be responsible for it. So I really want you to help protect yourself as well, your organization, when you're issuing these, and just making sure that you are comfortable with, as an organization, that you're comfortable with what you're asking of the subrecipients to make sure that they have that capacity. And I don't say that to indicate that you cannot subaward them. They might just need a little bit of extra guidance or technical assistance or help. So just keep things in mind. And Lisa asked if the slides would be sent after the webinar, and Sarah said yes, she will send those out, so thank you. And I have one more question, and I think I'm going to answer that in the chat box just because I haven't read it yet. So thank you guys for your questions, and keep them coming. Thanks, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Suhaila, for that. Great questions, everyone. Keep them coming. This is why we have these. Please keep bringing in the questions. So now we got past the big stuff. Now we're coming down to the end. If we were in person, I probably would have done some joke or something saying we were at the end. We finally made it. Everybody would have had a sigh of relief because they're ready to go on break. But next we are going to talk about grant modifications. Suhaila did talk a bit about that in some of the previous questions that we had. But basically, the grant modifications in the new system, they are now called Grant Award Modifications, or GAMs. Back in the GMS days, they were considered GANs, Grant Adjustment Notices. Wow, I'm already forgetting the old ways now. So basically, GAMs, Grant Award Modifications, are the same thing. So we, as the GFMD team, we focus on the budget modifications as well as the change of grant period, or that's the grant extensions. So those are the two that we focus on. Like Suhaila indicated earlier, budget modification, there are certain requirements needed to hit a budget modification. So with a budget modification GAM, it needs to meet one of these requirements. Either you are changing the scope of the program, so that means you are submitting the change of scope GAM. The other one is if you are moving funds from one category that wasn't approved. So for example, let's say your budget was approved and you had no funds in supplies. Let's say a year into your grant, you decide, hey, we want to, add supplies to our grant. Budget modification will be required. Even if the supplies are only $100, the budget modification will be required because you're moving funds into a category that was not previously approved, that basically was at zero. And the third one would be the one most common that triggers a budget modification is the cumulative change of 10% of the awarded amount. So for the example like Suhaila gave earlier, if your award was for $300,000 and you are going to move $15,000 from contracts, $15,000 from others into personnel, so that is you're moving $30,000 from one particular or multiple categories into another category, budget modification will be triggered and you will have to submit that. And remember, this is a cumulative change. So this is one of the reasons why you want to have a good accounting system. You want to keep track of those changes. As we indicated, if it's below the 10%, let's say for example, let's say you move $10,000 from other to personnel. It doesn't trigger budget modification because it's below, and your grant is for $300,000. You're only moving $10,000. That's below the 10% threshold. But you want to keep track of those changes because let's say you come back 6 months later and you decide, okay, well, we need to move an additional $20,000 from consultants into personnel. Okay, so you made a change first for $10,000 from other to personnel. Now you're moving an additional $20,000 from contracts to personnel. So that will trigger the 10% threshold. Because you just moved $30,000 because it's a cumulative change. So you also want to remember that. It is the cumulative change through the grant process. Once you hit that 10%, you got to submit a budget modification. So then once you submit that budget modification, that changes your budget. That basically means now you have to submit a new budget, a revised budget reflecting those changes. And then at that point, that 10% amount just resets basically. So from that new budget, you'll do it. If you make additional changes, you'll start over again. With the budget modification GAM, you want to ensure that you are including a revised budget. The revised budget is basically going to be replacing the original approved budget. So it has to be just as detailed as the original budget that was submitted. And when I say it has to be detailed, it has to be, all the costs has to be broken down, and you have to include the supportive narrative for each of the costs. So just like how when you submit your budget at the start of the grant, where you have to have, each of the costs, the line items broken down by, the computation of it, and a brief narrative, your revised budget should be the same. It should be just as detailed. We need to basically see how the funds are being spent, or if they've already been spent, how were they spent. So you want to ensure that those budgets are as detailed as possible. In addition, you want to include any indirect cost rate agreements if you have them. Throughout your grant year, if you have a negotiated cost rate agreement, you usually get your agreement every year, depending on how your agreement is. You want to ensure that you include all of them with the budget. I know right now not everybody's able to get into the Just Grant system, but one of the benefits of the new Just Grant system is you can update these documents whenever you want. So whenever you get a new indirect cost rate agreement, you can attach it into Just Grants. So when you are creating those grant award modifications, you can easily already have it in the system and just drag it over and attach it to the GAM. So that way you'll have it in the system, as well as you can easily put it into the budget modification. The budget modification process for approval does take a little longer than most of the other GAMs because it will have to go through multiple steps for approval. Once it's submitted by the grantee, it goes into a program specialist, and then it comes to GFMD. Then from there, it gets approved by our supervisor. So it is, just take that into consideration that the budget modification GAM may take a little longer to get approved, but you want to make sure that you're submitting it, and you're submitting it with some type of time, so give yourself some time before making any changes prior to getting approval. You don't want to take any action until your budget modification GAM has been approved, because just in case if the GAM gets denied or certain things are going to get unallowable, or we may say, well, certain changes we can't approve, and you don't want to go ahead and make those changes, and then we say it's not approved, and now you have to eat those costs or eat those changes. So it's always important. Submit those GAMs in a timely, early enough. Give us enough time to review it and approve it. And once it's approved, organizations can go ahead and make those changes. Next, we're going to talk about closeout and record retention. Closeouts, that's not going to be for a while, but it's always good to share this information so you can have it. So for closeout, what are the steps included with the closeout is organizations will submit their final financial status report, SF 425, their final progress report. They will also ensure that all their special conditions are satisfied. As I said, you want to make sure that you're reading and reviewing your special conditions, and you want to make sure that if there's any special conditions that require you to either submit anything or follow up with our office, you make sure that you have satisfied those special conditions. And then the last step is the financial reconciliation. On our end, our closeout specialist does a financial reconciliation where they check the SF425 to our accounting system to see what was drawn down and what was indicated in the financial federal report. So that's why it's always important that your financial reports indicate what you actually spent, because that should be reflected on the report. When we review during the financial reconciliation, that is what we're looking at. So you want to make sure that information is correct. In addition, like we said, any awards that has a project end date after November 12th, their closeout package will have 120 days to complete the closeout instead of the old 90 days. You want to also make sure to keep in mind that noncompliance with the closeout requirements may have a negative impact on future funding. So this is why it's important that you get all these things done within the 120 days, because a lot of times that is the biggest thing that we have seen. Our office gets audits. Our office gets audited just like everybody else, and a lot of times that comes up as a finding that closeouts aren't done in a timely basis. So just how we have a responsibility to make sure closeouts are done, we also have to make sure the grantees are getting them done in a timely basis. So that's why the 120 day, that is why the 120 came into play, giving grantees more time to get it done. So to ensure that they, one, completing the closeout properly, and they complete it in a timely basis. Like I said, the financial reconciliation is done in Just Grants, where we review what was reported as expenditures, i.e. the 425, to what was actually spent in our accounting system. That's why it's important that the 425 is reflective on your general ledger, because if your general ledger or your 425 indicates that you have spent more than what you've drawn down, then we owe you, a difference of that amount. And if that is the case, that is indicated, and the grantees can just go in and draw down that difference. if there is an amount that, let's say the 425 reflects that you spent less than what you actually drew down, so i.e. you owe us funds, then those funds will need to be returned to us within that 120 period. Same thing with if you have to draw down funds, you want to make sure that you submit that payment request within that 120-day period. And with the new system, with ASAP, they have, once everything gets up and running, drawdowns will be able to be done like next day drawdowns. So it's going to, grantees are able to get their funds a bit faster now with the new system. Again, if you have any questions in regards to like if you need to return funds or maybe if pulling or drawing down those funds, just contact GFMD. But again, this is for closeout, so that's not for a while, but always keep that in mind. Okay, so next, record retention. Records, they must be retained for a period of 3 years. It's a 3 years from the project end date, or if you have any pending open audits or anything, it has to be 3 years from the close of that. So you want to make sure that you're keeping financial records, supporting documentation, anything related to the grant. You want to keep it for a minimum of 3 years. One of the questions we always ask in our pre-award risk assessment is your record retention policy. So the organization should have their record retention policies in place that at the minimum has to be comparable to this. Again, like I said before, you can have either hard copies or electronic copies, but the records need to be accessible, and as well as any confidential information needs to be secured properly. So, if it's electronic, ensure that you have proper passwords, proper individuals have access to that information. If it's hard copies, whether it is a lockbox or like the secured cabinets or anything of that nature, you need to ensure that that information is secured properly. Again, for record retention, if you want to see what are the administrative requirements, regulations, what they say about it, Part 200, 334 has information on record retention. Okay, so we have come to the end of our presentation. Here is just a link of several resources. The first link is for the Uniform Administrative Requirements of Federal Regulations. Like I said, you should keep that bookmarked. If there's anything you're looking for that, you can just hit Control F and do a search for what you're looking for. Or if you want to just enjoy a nice weekend, right outside and have something lovely to read, I would say, print it out and enjoy reading the federal regulations, because, that's how we spend our weekends, just reading regulations. In addition, we have the OVW solicitation guide. We have a link to the DOJ Financial Grants Management Guide. Like I said, that's available on our site, as well as with the Just Grant System, the links will be there. Suhaila created a great presentation for creating a budget. This was all her. She did a great job on it. I would recommend checking that out. Very useful information, not just with the budget, but just in general about what we talked about today, as well as just more in detail on what grantees should be looking for with their budgets. In addition, we have a link to the Just Grants resources, training resources. This information, because I know this new system, it's a lot, just changing from an old system to a new, and there'd probably been people working with Just Grants for a long period of time. You get used to it, and now you got to move into a new system. So it is a lot. It is a bit overwhelming, but I will say there is lots of useful resources and guides, and this site, this link right here, has a lot of it. They created a lot of videos as well as PDF guides on how to complete activities and everything of that nature in Just Grants. So I would recommend just taking some time, look over that information, look over this site. It has, like I said, all of the information related to Just Grants, as well as information in regards to ASAP. So I would highly recommend that the organization just take some time, look this over, look over the guides, just to see how the system works. And it's, like I said, They're working on getting everything up to date, get everything up and running. And once everything comes up and running, I do believe that the system will make life a lot easier for the grantees as well as ourselves in regards to managing our grants. And one other thing we do have is online financial training. So just like everything that we talked about today, but just in more detail, just a lot more detail, a lot more information, we do have an online training. This online training, it is a lot, it's like 14 to 16 hours to complete, but you're not required to do it all at once. So you can start it, come back, and get it done. Usually once you start it, you have 1 year to complete it. If you don't complete it within a year, you're just going to have to start over. But like I said, very useful information. They do have a final exam at the end. If you complete the exam, they do give you like a nice little certificate so you can print it out, put it on your, put it in your wall, put it, whenever we go back into the office, put it in the office, and, you can, share with everybody that you're very knowledgeable with grants financial management, so you can show off your certificate. But like I said, very useful information. You can use this. It has a lot of information what we talked about today as well as more in detail. To register for it, it will ask for your vendor number. You can find that in Just Grants under the entity profile. I believe it's like vendor code or vendor, it might say vendor number. But it will need that and your award number to register for that. And I think with that, we are done. So if there's any other final questions, anything else that you all want to add, feel free to add into the Q&A. Suhaila, do we have any other questions, anything else we should highlight that's been coming in?
Yeah, there were a few, thanks. So Laura asked, she said that they were granted a supplemental award. I am unable to submit a GAM because the budget is not updated in Just Grants. Is that because you are still in a transition period, or do I need to contact GFMD? And so I think that I assume the GAM that you're trying to submit is a budget mod GAM for your original award, because the only GAM that you can't submit is a budget mod GAM until the supplemental budget is approved. So once that supplemental budget or supplemental award receives an approved budget, then you can submit a budget mod GAM. But if I misunderstood that, just send an email to the help desk and we can clarify that for you and try to figure out what's going on. Marisa asked, hi, is the budget amount the total budget for all years of the grant? And so it is the cumulative award amount, so it would include all the years of your award and then plus any supplemental funds or supplemental years and funds that you receive. So Gail asked, I just to recap what the question is, or what I understood it to be, if their subrecipient moves 10%, what would you do in that case? And then so the subrecipient would submit a revised budget to you, because they submit one to you from the beginning, right? So they submit their anticipated costs for the subaward, and so you would pass through all the same requirements to the subrecipient, and so they would just submit a revised budget to you if they met any of those changes that require an official budget modification. And Vanessa asked, if there's no indirect cost rate agreement, how can one apply for one? And you can either contact your cognizant federal agency, and that's who you have the most amount of direct funds with, federal funds with, to negotiate a rate. If that's us, then go ahead and send an email to the GFMD help desk and we can send you some instructions. If that's another agency, contact them. And you can also use the de minimis rate, which Michael talked about. I think he talked about that, but it's where you have 10% of modified total direct costs. But just check out 2 CFR 200.414 for more information on the de minimis rate, or contact the help desk. And then Jessica said that they're getting ready to sign a new lease on their building space. It'll be over $250,000, where they need to follow the procurement procedures. And in general, it sounds like you probably should be following them. You just want to there's like different elements of procurement procedures that you want to ensure that you're following, like conflicts of interest, that the cost is fair market value, and even the CFR has a section on rental costs, and that you should be evaluating it regularly just to make sure that it's competitive, fair market value, et cetera. And then just, just make sure nothing's like really changed. But yeah, I think the procurement procedures should probably be followed just to, make sure that you're evaluating everything that's needed. And Jane, the last question I have is from Jane. She asked if on the FFRs, the previous FFRs did not have a de minimis as one of the options for the indirect cost type. And so I believe, though, that the new reports and just grants, I think that they're supposed to have that option that you can select for de minimis. Like if I remember correctly from previous conversations prior to the deployment, that was supposed to be the case. So if so I imagine that that's what's going to happen, that you'll have an actual option for that. And if I'm wrong and it wasn't developed for this, for when it went live, then just contact the help desk and, you can get clarification on that. And that's it for the questions. I wanted to thank everybody also. I know that we went well over our time that we had kind of talked about for when you got your invitation for this. So thank you for everybody who stuck around this long. I know that your time is very valuable, and we really appreciate that, all these really great questions, and they're all super insightful, and we appreciate all the time and everything that you do for carrying out this great work for our grants. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for staying on. Thank you, Sarah, for setting this up and everything. Thank you, Carrie. She answered some of the questions. If there's anything else that we need, like I said before, just email our help desk. We will follow up with you. And yeah, if there's anything else, we bid you everyone have a good evening.